What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over the basic stamina system part 2. So we're going to have stamina regeneration changes and updates, as well as an overall upgrade to the stamina system. So you can see now, when I go to use my stamina, it will continue to deplete until I release the button, in which case I actually have a refractory period. So I have this recovery period that it will not start regenerating as soon as I release the button, but rather about 2 seconds after I've released the input. So if I start sprinting, I stop, I start sprinting, I stop, I start sprinting, I stop, you can see it's going to take 2 seconds of me not pressing the input until it starts regaining stamina again. On top of that, if we actually use this entire bar, which it takes a little bit right now because we have a very small environment to run around in, but let's say we use our entire stamina bar. What I'm actually going to do is stop the player from sprinting now, so it does have an actual effect, and I'm going to make it where the player actually takes some damage. Now, taking damage is really just to show you that we can track and calculate when the stamina bar has been fully depleted. Here is where you may play an exhausted animation, something if you're familiar with Yakuza, you can sprint for a period of time. If you have sprinted for the maximum amount of time, then often you'll see the character kind of bend over, catch their breath, and it'll slow you down. It allows you to have to properly manage your stamina bar. So things like that we'll be able to do after today. And again, all these modifications to the actual bar, when you want it to start refilling, if you want it to refill, if you can sprint. So the last thing we can show here is when we run out entirely. Okay, it's going to take our health again. But once we're entirely out, the question is, can we sprint? We can't sprint if we have no stamina, okay? So we have to have at least a little bit of stamina to sprint. That's what we're going to be covering today. So before we get started, if you'd like to get caught up in the series, you can check out this playlist right here, which is every episode of the third-person tutorial series. Otherwise, you can check out this episode right here, which was the previous episode where we set up the initial logic for the stamina system. And with that, let's get started. So we're going to be working almost exclusively in the code today, so let's take a look in our third-person tutorial character.h class. Okay, and what we need to do is add a few new variables and functions. So if you scroll down to where your functions are, I've added a new function called enable stamina gain, as well as one called depleted all stamina. So enable stamina gain is when we want to allow the character to begin gaining stamina again. In our case, after 2 seconds without using stamina, in this case the only thing that uses stamina is the character sprinting, so within 2 seconds of the character not sprinting, they will begin regaining their stamina. This is what enable stamina gain is going to cover. We also have depleted all stamina, which is the logic that's going to be called and have to be performed when the stamina bar is completely empty. So once you run out of stamina on this character, what will you do? You could damage them, you could make them go to the exhausted animation, you could delay their stamina regeneration at this point. You have quite a few options. And so make those two functions, and then we can scroll down and take a look at the other functions related to stamina. So I have this can stamina recharge boolean, which I commented out the U property line by mistake. You can leave it in, although we don't need it today. So we have can stamina recharge, which is essentially, is the character in a state where their stamina can recharge at the moment? So if the character has lost some of their stamina, but they haven't used stamina within 2 seconds, we're going to allow them to recharge. However, say the character gets a debuff in the future, maybe you don't want them to increase their stamina again. You know, maybe they get their stamina halved, or maybe they have a longer delay. Like I said, if they deplete their bar, you could increase the delay. So that's what this Boolean is going to track. So in the previous episode, we had a bunch of stamina variables. In fact, we had 4. We had our current stamina, maximum stamina. So how much stamina the character had at the current time, as well as how much the character could have at the maximum. Then we also had how fast the stamina depletes when the character is, for example, sprinting, and how fast the stamina recharges when it is able to be recharged. I'm adding in a new one today, and I'm calling it delay for stamina recharge. So basically, how much time has to pass until the stamina will begin recharging. All right. We're going to need another variable as well. It's the timer handle, actually, because we're going to be using timers today. We're going to be using real-world seconds and things like that to determine how long our delay should be between recharges and depleting the stamina bar. So you make something called an F timer handle, and I've called it stamina recharge timer handle. We'll get into this a lot more in the CPP, but go ahead and add that for now. And then we'll go over kind of all the sprinting logic again, and I'll show you the process as it gets set up. So first things first, go into the constructor where you have all your variables. Make sure you set the others. I've set the Ken stamina recharge boolean to true. The delay for stamina recharge to be 2.0 or 2 seconds. The timer does not have to be initialized. Okay, so sprinting and stop sprinting, they get called when we press the sprint key. When we release the sprint key, the character stops sprinting. Simple enough. These are the functions we were working in before to trigger the fast movement and the different animations. Let's take a look at these two functions again, because there are a few additional checks we want to add now and additional things we want to do to allow us to take full control of the character, what they can do when they have stamina, and what they can't do when they don't have stamina. Okay, so in the sprint function, you previously had this logic right here, these 3 lines. We were printing a log to show that we were sprinting, we were setting is sprinting to true, and then we were increasing the maximum walk speed. Well, I'm encompassing everything in here in this if statement if current stamina is greater than 0.0f. This gets called as soon as we press the button to sprint. So if the stamina is not above the minimum value we can have, 0.0, then there's no reason to go into any of this other logic. We don't want to allow the character to sprint if they don't have the stamina to do so. So simple if check, make sure that the current stamina is above the minimum value. Then do this logic. We'll fix that issue. We have 2 other lines in here than this comment, which I'll get more into in a second. We should come back to this after we've addressed setting up the timer so that you understand why the clear timer is important. So you can add these 2 lines for now if you like. I'll explain the reasoning for them in a little bit. Now let's look at stop sprinting. Stop sprinting had these 3 lines previously: log, reset the is sprinting variable, and reset the max walk speed. I have an additional if check now to make sure that the character is sprinting before we do the logic to stop them from sprinting. This is for a few reasons, actually. One of the reasons is that if you were to, say, pause the game and release the sprint key, since this boolean would not have been reset since the game was paused and the character would not be able to take inputs, then you could actually miss the input action of releasing the key, and you'd either never stop sprinting or you would release it and it wouldn't adjust the walk speed or the boolean, and you could get caught in a loop. That's one reason. The other reason is what we're doing today with the timer. We also want to call stop sprinting once the stamina is fully depleted. So even if the character does not release the input on their own, we want the ability to force stop the character from sprinting. So because of that, if the character is already not sprinting, we don't want to do this again, specifically because this last line that we're adding in here. we're doing a set timer, which is going to start this countdown of 2 seconds to recharge the stamina. However, if we call this when the timer is already running, it is going to reset the timer. So for example, if I ran out of stamina and I'm waiting for it to recharge, but I keep pressing and releasing the shift key, which is my sprint key, then I'm going to continuously restart this timer. So my recharge time could be 10, 20, 100 seconds if I keep pressing it. We don't want that. We want it to always be 2 seconds in this case. And so we don't want the user input to affect that. All right. So basically add this if statement to check and see if we are sprinting before we do the logic to stop sprinting. And then we're going to add this line. This line looks like a scary one, but it's not bad. It's just weird the first time you see it. So if you're not familiar with timers, don't worry. We're going to get world, get timer manager, dot set timer. So timer manager is something that exists within Unreal Engine. You don't have to add it to your level or anything like that. It is just part of the world, and you can call functions on it and then pass it data, and it will do what it's meant to do. So I didn't write any of this myself. This is all custom Unreal functions. You'll be able to find this. So get world, get timer manager, dot set timer. Now set timer has a bunch of our arguments here. And so it's going to be the timer handle, which is used for things like clearing it, resetting it, pausing it, and starting it in this case. So that's why we had to make that timer handle variable. This keeps track of how far along the timer is and other factors. This is the actor or object that this timer is going to be performed on. So once this timer handle reaches the value that we expect, in this case 2 seconds, we're going to use this actor to call this function. Okay? So this actor, this character, is going to call the enable stamina gain function. That's what this line is. All right. Then we need to know the time that the timer is trying to reach. Delay for stamina recharge. That's what that variable is for. That's the 2 seconds. And then the false here is if this timer is repeating automatically. So if I put this as true, it would continuously, as soon as it reached the 2 seconds, it would start using the timer again in hopes to reach 2 seconds and call the function again. We don't really want to do that. We only want to call this function one time. So we can set this as false. But those are the parameters here. And that's why I've set it up this way. I know we haven't made this function in the CPP yet. We just made it in the .h, so we'll get to that. But now you can see how to start the timer. So again, quick recap. This handle is going to call this function on this class. So enable stamina gain on our character that ran out of stamina. Once the timer handle has reached 2 seconds, and then it's going to basically keep it in a waiting state for any other calls. It's not going to repeat. So now this timer is working for 2 seconds. And once that's up, it will call the enable stamina gain function. All right. So let's go back to our sprint function now that you know how to set up the timer. There's also something we can do called clear timer. A clear timer is going to reset the timer and clean up any references, any data that it's holding so that it can be used again in the future safely. What you need to do to call this is get world, get timer manager, dot clear timer, and all you have to do is pass it a handle. So we want to pass it the same handle that we passed in that we started the timer on. The reason we're resetting this in the sprint function, think about it. So in stop sprinting, so once the stamina has been depleted or the character has released the sprint key, 2 seconds after, we want to start the stamina gain again. Okay? Every time we press the sprint key, well, that's not too, we're breaking that cycle of not pressing the sprint key. So any time spent waiting there while the character is catching their breath is broken now, and they have to begin sprinting again if possible. Because of that, we want to clear our timer. It's got to start over from the beginning. I've also set can stamina recharge to false, because we're going to use this in tick to determine when our stamina should be recharging, and if it's false, we're not going to charge it. So if we're sprinting, set it to false. We're not ready for it to be recharged yet. And now we've updated our sprint and stop sprinting functions, which is where a lot of our sprint logic comes from, of course. So hopefully that makes sense. Now let's go into our new functions that we have to make. We have to make an enable stamina gain and a depleted all stamina function. We also need to update our tick function at the bottom here. So let's take a look at this. We have enable stamina gain, and all I do is set can stamina recharge to true. Now, you could do a lot more in here if you want. I'm talking particle effects, sound effects, even though it's not for sprinting. As far as sound effects go, I think of like the Halo shield charge sound. You know, if you haven't taken damage in a certain period of time, then your shield is going to regenerate, and it's going to make that classic beep that it does. So you could do other things in here. Once the stamina gain is available again, and the character is going to begin gaining stamina back, recharging their stamina, you could do a bunch of stuff in here. Sound effects, visual effects, setting booleans to true or false, you know, resetting character states, those sort of things. For now, all I have to do to get this to function is reset the can stamina recharge variable and set it back to true. Then we also have a depleted all stamina variable, or excuse me, depleted all stamina function, where this is what happens when we are fully out of stamina. So the first thing I do is I call stop sprinting, which again, that's forcing me to call the stop sprinting function here. Even if the input isn't released, it's just saying, yeah, we don't want the character to be able to sprint anymore. They don't have the ability to. And then you can do other things in here. Like I said, you could set them to like an exhausted state or increase their delay for stamina recharge. In this case, just so I could give you a visual example, I just made the character take damage once they ran out of stamina. You can do whatever you want. This will be changing in the future. I don't think you should take damage for running out of stamina, but I just wanted to show you. Now the other thing is tick. So we had in here before a much more simplified version of this. We had, if the character was sprinting, we were setting the current stamina to this value. This has not changed. I already was going over this before in the previous episode. So what this is doing is, as the character is sprinting, we're lerping from the current stamina down to 0. This is how much time has passed, and this is the usage rate that we want to take from the stamina. So basically, over time, the stamina is approaching 0 because they're running out. They're using it up. We also had an else statement that was current stamina this. So basically, this one is saying we take our current stamina, we're lerping to max stamina. This is the time that's passed, and we're using the stamina recharge rate. So we had this if is sprinting with this lerp or interp 2, and we had this else with this interp 2. But you can see there's a little bit more here now. So to go over it as a whole, if we are sprinting, we want to lerp to 0. We want to be using our sprint bar, our stamina that we have. We want that to be decreasing. However, if after decreasing the bar, if it is less than or equal to 0.0f, then we want to call depleted all stamina. Basically, at this point, we have used all of our stamina, and now the character needs to take the repercussions of that. Else, if the character is not sprinting, and if the current stamina is less than the maximum amount of stamina they can have, we check to see if can stamina recharge. Remember, that's that boolean we were setting. So it says it's set to true and enable stamina gain, and it's set to false and start sprinting, or just sprint. If the stamina can recharge, then we're going to call the recharge logic. Otherwise, if the stamina can't recharge yet, we just sit there and don't move. Okay. And with that done, we are able to do everything that you see on the screen. We're able to actually sprint, give a 2-second delay, re-enable the stamina recharge, and allow it to recharge to full. However, like I mentioned, we also have actual guidelines in here for the character to follow. So once they are out of stamina, they can no longer sprint until they get more. So as I'm about to use the rest of it here, you'll see I don't release my key, okay? But I took damage and I can't sprint anymore. Now my stamina is recharging, I can sprint again. So there you go. That's how this system works. There is one other thing that I would like to cover with the stamina that we'll cover in the future, but you should really only be able to use stamina while you're moving or doing other actions. We'll add it to attacks and things down the line, but you shouldn't be able to just use your stamina by standing here, holding the input. So in the next stamina episode we have, we'll go over attacks, how we can configure stamina values with them based on the weapons we have or the equipment we have, and also what we want to do about tracking stamina only when we're sprinting or in a sprinting state. We don't want to just track it when we're pressing the button like we're currently doing. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for all the love. I am really grateful, and it really encourages me to continuously work on these videos, so thank you so much. If you had any issues with this episode or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help you out. It's completely free. And anyway, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.